Let's understand this simple PHP example step by step. The first line opens the PHP tag, written as less than $PHP. This tells the computer that everything inside this block is PHP code. Next, we write $patient ID equals 512 semicolon. The $sign indicates that this is a variable. The variable name, patient ID, is used to store a number, and we are assigning the value 512 to it. The semicolon at the end marks the completion of the statement. In PHP, variable names are case-sensitive, meaning patient ID with capital letters is different from patient id in all lowercase. It's a good habit to choose clear and meaningful names for variables that describe the kind of data they hold. Now, the next line says, echo $patient ID semicolon. The word echo is a command that tells PHP to display something on the screen. So, when this code runs, it will print the number 512. There will be no extra space or line, just the number itself. After that, we have the closing PHP tag, written as $greater than. This indicates that the PHP code block has ended. However, in modern PHP files that contain only PHP code, developers often skip the closing tag to avoid accidental spaces or errors after the code ends. If you forget the $sign or the semicolon, PHP will show a syntax error, which means something is wrong in the structure of the code. And if you try to print a variable that was never defined, PHP will display a warning message. To check the type and value of a variable, you can use var dump, open bracket, $patient ID, close bracket, semicolon. This command helps you see both the variable's type and its value while testing your code. If this number comes from user input, always sanitize it before printing to the screen. You can use the HTML special characters function to prevent hacking attempts such as cross-site scripting. Finally, to test this program, save it with the extension .php, run it on a PHP-enabled server, and you will see the number 512 displayed in your browser. This simple script demonstrates how to define a variable, assign a value, and display it using the echo command in PHP. In the previous example, we created a variable called patient ID and stored the number 512 in it. Here, even though the variable is not explicitly declared as an integer, PHP automatically assumes that it is an integer because of the type of data it contains. In PHP, the data type of a variable is decided dynamically by the compiler based on the assigned value. Since a patient identification number is always a whole number and cannot have a decimal or fractional part, PHP recognizes it as an integer automatically. In programming, integers are used to represent whole numbers, numbers without any decimal points. Therefore, whenever your data represents counts, identifiers, or any quantity that cannot be fractional, you should use the integer type. This makes the program more efficient and logical. Now, every computer system has a limit on how large or small an integer value can be. In PHP, you can check these limits using predefined constants. The most important of these constants is PHP_int_max. This constant tells you the maximum integer value your PHP system can handle. It is predefined by the PHP core, meaning you don't have to create or define it yourself. It's already built in. There are also other constants that help you understand integer limits. The first one is PHP_int_min, which represents the smallest possible integer value your system can store. The second one is PHP_int_size, which tells you how many bytes are used to represent an integer in your PHP environment. These values may differ slightly depending on whether you are running PHP on a 32-bit or 64-bit system. Code Snippet 2, which comes next, shows an example of how to retrieve the maximum integer value using PHP_int_max. This helps programmers understand the limits of numerical operations in their PHP programs and avoid integer overflow errors when dealing with very large numbers. In this next example, we have a short PHP program that uses the predefined constant PHP_int_max. The code begins with the PHP opening tag. then simply writes echo PHP underscore int underscore max semicolon, and finally closes the PHP tag. When this code runs, PHP prints the largest integer value that your system can handle. This value depends on whether your system is 32-bit or 64-bit. On most modern 64-bit systems, the output will be 9,200,000,200, 23,372,000,000, trillion, 36,854,000,007,175,807. This output number represents the maximum integer limit supported by PHP on your machine. In other words, you cannot store any integer value larger than this number. If you try to go beyond it, PHP will automatically convert the value to a floating point number to handle the extra digits. Now, it's important to understand what qualifies as an integer in PHP. To be stored as an integer, the value must follow certain basic rules. It should have at least one digit. It should not contain a decimal point, and it can be either positive or negative. For example, numbers like 100 minus 5 or 10,000 are valid integers, but numbers like 10.5 or 12.03 are not. They are treated as floating point numbers. Instead, these rules help PHP know when a number should be stored using integer precision and when it should use floating point precision. Knowing this distinction helps programmers write more efficient and accurate code, especially when dealing with large calculations or counting operations where whole numbers are required. Integers in PHP can also be represented in different number systems. The most common one is base 10, also known as the decimal system. However, PHP also supports other bases. For example, base 16 is called hexadecimal, base 8 is called octal, and base 2 is known as binary notation. These different formats allow programmers to represent numbers in the way that best fits their program's needs, especially when working with low-level operations, memory addresses, or color codes in web development. Now, let's talk about a very useful debugging function in PHP called var dump. The function name is written as var_dump open bracket close bracket. This is a built-in PHP function that provides detailed information about one or more variables. When you use var dump, PHP will display both the data type and the actual value of the variable on the screen. This makes it extremely helpful when you are testing or debugging your code and want to confirm what kind of data is being stored inside your variables. For example, if you have a variable that contains the number 512, using var dump will not only show the number, but will also tell you that the type of the variable is an integer. Unlike the echo statement, which simply prints the value, var dump provides more descriptive information about what is inside your variable. It's important to note that var dump does not return any value. It simply outputs the information directly. This means you cannot assign its result to another variable. Instead, it's mainly used for checking and verifying data while writing or debugging programs. The next code example, Code Snippet 3, will demonstrate exactly how var dump displays both the data type and the value of a given input in PHP. In this code example, we are demonstrating how the var dump function works in PHP. The script begins with the PHP opening tag, followed by a comment line that says, PHP code to illustrate working of var dump function. Comments in PHP start with a double, / and are ignored by the interpreter. They're simply there to help humans understand what the code is doing. Next, we have the main function call, var_dump, open bracket, var_dump, open bracket, 3, 3.1, false comma, array open bracket, 10, 20, 30, 40, close bracket, semicolon. At first glance, it may look confusing, but let's break it down carefully. The inner var dump function is being called with 4 different types of data. The first one is the integer value 3. The second is the floating point number 3.1. The third is a Boolean value false. And the fourth is an array containing the 4 integers 10, 20, 30, and 40. When this code runs, PHP outputs detailed information about each of these values. The result shows the type of each variable, followed by its value in parentheses. For example, int3 means that the first value is an integer with a value of 3. Float 3.1 means that the second value is a floating number 3.1. Bool false means the third value is a Boolean and its logical value is false. Then, PHP shows the array by indicating array 4, meaning there are 4 elements in the array, and lists them one by one with their corresponding keys and values. The keys start from 0 and go up to 3, each storing an integer value. Finally, you will notice that the last line of the output says null. This happens because vardump itself does not return any value. It only prints information directly to the output. Since the outer var dump is trying to dump the result of another var dump, and because the inner one does not return anything, PHP treats that as null. This example is a powerful demonstration of how vardump can help you inspect your data in real time. It tells you not only the values stored in your variables, but also their exact data types. This is especially useful when debugging or verifying that your variables are being processed as you expect. In the previous example, we used vardump to display information about different literals such as integers, floating point numbers, Boolean values, and arrays. Since we used literal values directly in the function, vardump simply displayed the data type of each literal rather than variable names. If we had stored these values inside variables and then used vardump on them, the output would have shown both the variable's data type and its actual value. Now let's move to the next data type in PHP, which is the float type. A float, also known as a floating point number, represents a number that contains a decimal point or is written in exponential form. For example, numbers like 256.4, 10.358, or 9.8 are all float values. You can also write very large or very small numbers using scientific or exponential notation. For example, 7.64e plus 5, which means 7.64 times 10 to the power of 5, or 5.56e minus 5, which means 5.56 times 10 to the power of negative 5. In PHP, the terms float, double, and real all refer to the same thing. They represent numbers that include fractional or decimal parts. So even though you might see different names in other programming languages, in PHP they are all treated as float values. The float data type is platform dependent, which means the range and precision can slightly vary depending on whether PHP is running on a 32-bit or 64-bit system. However, the maximum value that can generally be stored in a float variable is about 1.7976931348623 times 10 to the power of 308. That's an extremely large number, showing how powerful floating point representation can be. Floats in PHP have a precision of up to 14 digits, which means PHP can accurately represent numbers with up to 14 significant digits. Beyond that, rounding errors might occur because of hardware and memory limitations. This data type is especially useful for handling scientific calculations, measurements, percentages, or any value that requires fractional representation.